Hi everyone, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the sample or the example of the final unit project. Now, I don't have a student sample, which is why I didn't put one up originally, because I changed this project a little bit for your class because of the different time frame. So what I did is I plugged in some information from a class that I teach at the high school. So you can see in yellow the information I've put in. It's a ninth grade ESL class. It's a unit we actually read about penguins and different animals. And the big question is in the content is how do penguins adapt to different environments? So and that is aligned to these state standards in literacy. So I've got the 4 of those there. I won't read those. You can look at those if you want. So a question that has come up a lot about pre-assessments and what they should look like. A pre-assessment can take many forms. It could be like a test. It doesn't have to be like a test, but it should be something that you can record, that you have down um, in either that the student has written, or you write, so that you can go back to that and look at the growth of the student. Just like when we do evaluations for administrators, we have to show student growth. Well, we want to see student growth. We want the students to be able to see their growth. So what I often do is a quick write. And even level ones can do quick writes because they can write vocabulary, they can draw pictures, and they can add things in their home language if they choose. Now, I can read Spanish, so if most of my students are Spanish speakers, and so that works pretty well. But even if you have students who are not Spanish speakers, sometimes you can find another teacher to translate. But even if you can, it's also informative to see how much they can write in their home language and how comfortable they seem with that. So there are things you can do with that. So going down to the second part, you can see I have a content objective. Sometimes you can have more than one content objective, that's fine. So this kind of objective is students will be able to identify the types of penguins and their adaptation. Now the language objective is not different than the content objective. It is just specifying what language students need to produce to achieve the content objective. So in this case, identifying is they'll be developing vocabulary, they'll be watching a video, discussing a video, and they will be reading some short sentences and matching them. So those are what will be happening in the language objectives. Now, I also want to talk briefly about funds of knowledge. You can move things around a little bit in this template. And so for this lesson, I shifted the funds of knowledge question to the front because in the lesson, I'm going to do an activity, or I do an activity where I try to validate students' fund of knowledge. Instead of starting actually after the pre-assessment about penguins, I actually just asked them about animals in general, what animals they might have ever had in their home or in their community. Many of my students come from rural areas. They've had horses or dogs, or they've hunted animals, they've raised animals. If they've lived in a city, they may have had pets or know people that have pets. This allows them to talk or write about some familiar topics. So this is one way to connect with funds of knowledge with a topic about penguins, which they don't really have a funds of knowledge about usually. Most of my students have not been to a zoo and have not seen penguins in a live context. So in funds of knowledge, it's important to remember that funds of knowledge can be really positive experiences, but sometimes the dark experiences that our students have had, more traumatic things, also are part of their funds of knowledge. And it's important to have a venue for them to connect to those if they choose. I'm not saying we should probe into the painful experience of students, but just to give you an example, Elizabeth Dutro writes about this. If anyone wants more information, I can give you the article. That she was in a middle school class and the teacher was teaching about the Great Depression and asked for a quick write about ways in which people struggle financially. And the teacher was not looking actually to connect to students' funds of knowledge. She was looking for something more objective. She thought students would just talk about stores that had closed in the community, things like that. But the students connected to it, made it their own, and this whole class of students who were actually identified as struggling students, at-risk students, suddenly wrote reams and reams. The class kind of went off into a whole different direction about their experiences. Some of them had been homeless. Some of them had families have had a lot of financial trauma. And so the teacher really then delved into ways for the students when they chose to connect to their funds of knowledge. They were able to write, and the researchers showed this beautifully, like their sentences, were varied length. They used such a deeper vocabulary. They weren't perfect, but they were much better than when the students were asked to write about topics that they didn't connect to at all. So just keep in mind that your funds of knowledge, you can ask open questions so that if students choose to write about topics, their experiences, that they have a place to do that. So I also move things around a little bit, and you can move things around a little bit, is that I wrote the description of the activity, you can see in yellow, and then I connected it to the WIDA standards. I missed one here, green. In green, I wrote the WIDA can do. So you can see that I'm going to be pre-teaching and students will be writing a vocabulary, and WIDA can do at level 1 states that students at level 1 can label content-related diagrams, and they can use words and phrase banks, okay? So I'm connecting the WIDA can-dos with my activities. I chose to do it that way. Sometimes people do it in a separate category, and that's fine too. If you have different ways to combine it, that's fine as long as the information's there. The next is how do we help students move to the next level? Well, I'm having students read short phrases and sentences, but some students might be ready to formulate questions. So that would be a level 2. So if I see students that are really adept at some of the reading, I will push them to write some questions. All right. So I just did the one activity to give you an idea. And then at the end, remember, you're going to do a post-assessment. All right. And then the post-assessment is a little more structured. And I make a leveled assessment. So levels 1 and 2 do a Venn diagram. They have a word bank. Levels 2 and 3. Now, see, notice I have levels 1 and 2, 2 and 3. It depends on where the student are. Some level 2s are kind of beginning level 2s, like a 2.0. Some level 2s are 2.9, and they're ready to move up. So depending on where the students are, I have the students do different activities, similar activities for their post-assessment. And then don't forget that at the end you'll have a reflection, reflecting how whether this experience, was difficult, was it easy, what did you learn that was new, what can you do yet to grow. So, and what was the experience of the Blackboard discussion on this? Did it help? Because remember, you will be putting this on Blackboard to get feedback from your peers. So let me know if you have any questions. I hope this was helpful. Take care and be safe.